the day everything changed. Isabella Rivera wiped the sweat from her forehead as she organized medicines in her father's clinic. The summer heat pressed down on the small town of Copper Valley like a heavy blanket. She was 22 years old, with dark hair that fell in waves down her back and gentle brown eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her to help her father, Dr. Miguel Rivera, care for the sick and injured. "Isabella," her father called from the front room. "We have an emergency. Construction accident at the railroad site." She grabbed her medical bag and rushed to help. Minutes later, men carried in an injured worker on a stretcher. The man was tall and handsome, with golden hair and blue eyes that were tight with pain. His expensive clothes were torn and covered in dirt and blood. "What happened?" Isabella asked, immediately beginning to examine the wound on his leg. "Beam fell on him," one of the workers explained. "This is Mr. James Winchester, the railroad supervisor." Isabella's hands froze for just a moment. Winchester. Everyone in Copper Valley knew that name. The Winchester family owned the railroad company, the bank, the general store, and half the land in the territory. They were powerful, wealthy, and according to her father, completely ruthless. But she was a healer. She pushed aside her thoughts and focused on the injury. ### the man behind the name. As Isabella cleaned and stitched the deep cut on James's leg, she felt his eyes watching her. Her hands were steady and skilled, just as her father had taught her. She had been helping him since she was a child, learning about herbs, medicines, and how to heal both body and spirit. "You're very good at this," James said through gritted teeth. "Thank you," Isabella replied without looking up. "Try not to move. This needs 16 stitches." "16 exactly?" James asked, surprised by her precision. "Exactly." She tied off another stitch with expert efficiency. "My father taught me that healing is both art and science. You must be precise." James studied her face as she worked. Unlike the society women he usually met, Isabella seemed completely focused on her task, not on impressing him or acting shy because of his family name. There was a quiet strength about her that fascinated him. "Will I be able to walk?" he asked. "In a few weeks if you follow my instructions." Isabella finally looked up and met his eyes. "You must keep the wound clean. Change the bandage every day. Rest for at least 10 days. No walking on it for the first week." 10 days. James protested. "I can't stop working for 10 days. The railroad construction is behind schedule." Isabella's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "Mr. Winchester, you can rest for 10 days, or you can risk infection, lose your leg, and never walk again. Your choice." James blinked in surprise. No one spoke to him like that. Most people treated him with careful respect or fearful politeness because of his family's power. But this young woman looked at him like he was just another foolish patient who didn't understand basic medical advice. And somehow that made him smile. ## secret meetings begin. James followed Isabella's instructions. Every other day, he returned to the clinic for her to check his wound and change his bandage. Dr. Rivera was usually busy with other patients, so Isabella took care of James herself. During these visits they began to talk. James told her about his dreams of building railroads that would connect distant towns and bring prosperity to everyone. Isabella shared her hope of opening a bigger clinic where they could help more people, especially the poor families who couldn't afford expensive doctors. "Why do you care so much about helping people?" James asked one afternoon. Isabella looked out the window at the dusty street. "When I was 7, my mother got sick. A terrible fever. My father did everything he could, but the medicine she needed was too expensive. We couldn't afford it. She died in this very room." Her voice was soft but steady. "I promised myself that day that I would never let someone die because they didn't have enough money." James felt something shift in his chest. This woman was so different from everyone in his world, where money and status mattered more than anything else. Isabella cared about things that truly mattered. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. Isabella turned to look at him, and their eyes met. In that moment something passed between them. Something neither of them could name, but both of them felt deep in their hearts. ## love grows in shadows. After his leg healed, James found reasons to visit the clinic. He claimed to need advice about worker injuries. He asked questions about health conditions at the construction camps. Isabella knew these were excuses, and secretly she was glad. They began meeting in secret, away from the eyes of the town. James would ride out to the old mission ruins on the edge of town, and Isabella would walk there after finishing her work. They sat among the ancient stones and talked for hours, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "My family would never approve," James admitted one evening. "They believe we should only associate with our own kind. Wealthy families. Society people." "And what do you believe?" Isabella asked. James took her hand gently. "I believe I've never met anyone like you. You're kind and strong and brilliant. You care about helping people, not about money or status. You make me want to be a better man." Isabella's heart raced. She knew this was dangerous. The Winchester family was known for destroying anyone who got in their way. Her father had warned her many times to stay away from them, but when she looked into James's eyes, she saw genuine love there. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Not for me, but for what they might do to my father and our clinic if they find out about us." "I won't let anything happen to you or your father," James promised. "I love you, Isabella. I'll stand up to my family. I'll make them understand." ## the promise of forever. Over the next months, their love grew deeper and stronger. James brought her books from his family's library. Isabella taught him about the medicinal plants that grew in the desert. They dreamed together about a future where love mattered more than money, where people were judged by their character instead of their last name. One night, under a sky full of stars, James knelt before Isabella and pulled out a simple silver ring. "Isabella Rivera, will you marry me? I know I'm asking you to face opposition and hardship. My family will be angry. Society will talk. But I can't imagine my life without you. You've shown me what really matters. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Isabella's face as she nodded. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." They kissed under the stars, believing that love could conquer anything. James promised he would talk to his family the next day. He would announce their engagement publicly. He said he didn't care about his inheritance or his family's approval anymore. He chose love. He chose Isabella. Isabella walked home that night feeling like she was floating on air. She imagined their wedding, their life together, the children they would have. She imagined combining his resources with her medical knowledge to build the finest clinic in the territory, where everyone would be treated equally regardless of their ability to pay. Her father was still awake when she arrived home. He looked at her glowing face and sighed deeply. "He proposed, didn't he?" Dr. Rivera asked. "Yes, Papa." And I said yes. "He's going to tell his family tomorrow. Everything will be all right. You'll see. He loves me." Her father pulled her into a hug. "I hope you're right, Mihija. I truly hope you're right. But the Winchester family has broken many promises before. Be careful with your heart." ## the day of betrayal. Isabella woke early on what she believed would be the happiest day of her life. James had told her to meet him at the church at noon. He would talk to his family in the morning, then they would be married by afternoon. She put on her mother's wedding dress, which she had carefully altered to fit. It was simple white cotton, nothing fancy, but it had been her mother's and that made it precious. She pinned wildflowers in her hair and practiced her vows in the mirror. At 11:30, she and her father walked to the church. A few close friends waited inside. They had kept the ceremony small and secret, planning to announce it after the vows were said, and it was too late for the Winchester family to interfere. Noon came and passed. No James. 12:30. Still no James. 1 o'clock. Isabella's hands began to shake. At 2 o'clock, one of the ranch workers burst into the church out of breath. "Miss Rivera, you need to know. There's a wedding happening at the Winchester estate right now. Mr. James Winchester is marrying Miss Catherine Blackwood." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. The church spun around her. Her father caught her as her knees gave out. "No," she whispered. "No, he promised. He loves me." But even as she said the words, the terrible truth sank in. James had chosen his family's wealth and approval over her. The promises, the declarations of love, the dreams they had shared. All of it had been lies. Or worse, they had been real feelings that he had been too weak to fight for. Hashtag the Winchester revenge. Isabella spent 3 days in bed, unable to eat or speak. Her father worried she might die from a broken heart. But on the 4th day she got up. Her eyes were dry but hard. Something had changed inside her. The soft, trusting girl was gone, burned away by betrayal. "I'm going to work, Papa," she said. "Are you sure you're ready?" her father asked gently. "I have to be. We have patients who need us." She threw herself into work, trying to bury the pain under exhaustion. But the worst was yet to come. A week after James's wedding, his older brother Victor Winchester rode up to the clinic. Victor was everything James wasn't: cold, cruel, and openly hateful toward anyone he considered beneath his family's status. "Dr. Rivera," Victor announced loudly so everyone on the street could hear. "I'm here on behalf of the Territorial Medical Board. We've received complaints about your medical practices. Complaints about dangerous and unproven treatments. About patients dying under your care due to negligence." Isabella's father went pale. "What are you talking about? Those are lies." "There will be an investigation," Victor continued with a cruel smile. "Until then, you are ordered to close this clinic immediately. If you practice medicine during the investigation, you will be arrested." "You can't do this," Isabella shouted, stepping in front of her father. "This is because of me and James, isn't it? You're punishing my father for something I did." Victor's smile grew wider. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is simply about protecting the public from dangerous medical fraud." He looked directly at Isabella. "You should have known better than to reach above your station, girl. The Winchester family takes care of its own and destroys anyone who threatens us. Consider this a lesson." He rode away, leaving them standing in the street as neighbors whispered and stared. Hashtag the fire that destroyed everything. The investigation was a sham. The medical board was controlled by men who owed favors to the Winchester family. False witnesses came forward claiming Dr. Rivera had given them harmful treatments. Patients who had actually been cured suddenly couldn't remember being sick at all. Dr. Rivera's medical license was suspended. Without the clinic, they had no income. They began to sell their belongings to buy food. Isabella tried to find work, but everywhere she went, doors closed in her face. The Winchester family had spread word that anyone who helped the Riveras would lose the family's business and support. In a town where the Winchesters controlled everything, that was a death sentence. 2 months after James's wedding, on a cold October night, Isabella woke to the smell of smoke. She ran to her father's room and found it filled with flames. The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. "Papa!" she screamed, trying to reach him through the smoke and heat. She heard his voice from inside. "Isabella, get out. Save yourself." "No, I won't leave you." She wrapped a wet cloth around her face and crawled into the burning room. She found her father collapsed on the floor, overcome by smoke. Using strength she didn't know she had, she dragged him toward the door. They almost made it. But a burning beam fell from the ceiling, trapping her father's legs. He pushed Isabella away with the last of his strength. "Go," he gasped. "Live. Promise me you'll live." "Papa, no. Promise me." His voice was fierce despite the smoke choking him. "Don't let them win. Live and be strong. Make them pay for what they've done." Neighbors pulled Isabella from the burning building as she screamed her father's name. She watched the clinic, her home, and her father all burn to ashes. She watched everything she loved turn to smoke and dust. In the crowd, she saw Victor Winchester watching with satisfaction. And beside him, looking pale and sick, stood James. Their eyes met across the flames. For a moment, she saw guilt and horror in his face. But it was too late. Far too late. As Isabella collapsed to her knees in the dirt, her father's last words echoed in her mind. "Make them pay." And in that moment, in the ashes of everything she had loved, a new Isabella was born. Not the gentle healer, but someone harder. Someone who would burn just as bright as the fire that destroyed her life. Someone who would have revenge. Part 2. The fire of vengeance. Rising from destruction. Isabella barely remembered the days after the fire. She wandered through the ruins of her home like a ghost, picking through ashes looking for anything that had survived. She found her mother's wedding ring melted and twisted. She found the silver ring James had given her, blackened by smoke. She kept both but for very different reasons. One was a reminder of love. The other was a reminder of hate. Maria Santos found Isabella sleeping in the burned remains of the clinic 3 days after the fire. Maria was a wealthy widow whose life Dr. Rivera had saved years before when no other doctor would treat her. She was one of the few people in Copper Valley who wasn't afraid of the Winchester family. "Come with me," Maria said firmly, helping Isabella to her feet. "You can't stay here." "I have nowhere else to go," Isabella said in a hollow voice. "You have my home. You'll stay with me until you're ready to face the world again." In Maria's comfortable house on the edge of town, Isabella slowly returned to herself. But the girl who had believed in love and kindness was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes the world demanded strength, strategy, and yes, revenge. Maria didn't judge Isabella's dark thoughts. Instead, she gave her practical advice. "If you want to hurt the Winchester family, crying and suffering won't do it," Maria said one evening. "They're powerful because they have money and influence. If you want justice for your father, you need to become powerful yourself." "How?" Isabella asked bitterly. "I have nothing. They made sure of that." Maria smiled mysteriously. "You have me. And I have resources they don't know about. More importantly, you have something they'll never have: real intelligence and the strength that comes from surviving loss. We can use that." Hashtag the transformation. For 3 years, Isabella disappeared from Copper Valley. Maria sent her east to Boston, where she studied business and finance under a false name. Isabella Rivera became Elizabeth Rivers, a young widow from California seeking to make her fortune in business. She learned everything she could about how the wealthy made and kept their money. She studied contracts, investments, and most importantly, she studied the railroad business. She learned about land rights, government contracts, and construction costs. She memorized every detail until she knew as much as any railroad executive in the country. But she also studied the Winchester family specifically. She wrote letters to business associates, posing as a potential investor. She learned about their deals, their debts, their business practices. And slowly, a picture emerged that made her smile for the first time in years. The Winchester Railroad empire was built on fraud. They had used forged documents to claim land that belonged to Mexican families. They had bribed government officials to approve contracts. They had cut corners on construction, using cheap materials that barely met safety standards. Their railroad was a house of cards waiting to fall. All Isabella needed to do was give it the right push. Maria used her inheritance to back Isabella's business ventures. They bought small companies that the Winchesters needed but didn't consider important. They made smart investments that grew their wealth. By the end of 3 years, Isabella had transformed from a broken girl with nothing into a successful businesswoman with significant resources. Hashtag the return to Copper Valley. When Isabella returned to Copper Valley in the spring of 1883, almost no one recognized her. She wore expensive dresses and had adopted the confident manner of Eastern society women. Her hair was styled fashionably. She carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. She returned as Elizabeth Rivers, a railroad investor from Boston interested in expanding Western rail lines. She rented a house on the wealthy side of town, the side where the Winchester family lived. She hired servants and threw small social gatherings, carefully building her reputation as a respectable and wealthy widow. Victor Winchester was the first to take notice. He attended one of her gatherings and spent the evening trying to impress her with stories of his family's wealth and power. Isabella smiled and listened, hiding her hatred behind a mask of polite interest. "My brother James and his wife Catherine should meet you," Victor said. "James oversees our railroad construction. I'm sure he'd be interested in discussing business opportunities." Isabella's smile never wavered even as her heart pounded with rage. "I'd be delighted to meet them." The meeting was arranged for the following week. Isabella prepared herself carefully. She needed to control every emotion, show nothing but professional interest. She had waited 3 years for this moment. Hashtag face to face with the past. James walked into the meeting room at the Winchester estate and froze. His face went white as he stared at Isabella. She saw him recognize her despite the expensive clothes and sophisticated manner. She saw shock, guilt, and something that might have been pain flash across his face. "Mr. Winchester," Isabella said coolly, extending her hand as if they were strangers. "I'm Elizabeth Rivers. I've heard impressive things about your railroad operations." James took her hand mechanically, his eyes never leaving her face. "Miss Rivers. It's a pleasure." His wife Catherine entered the room then, a beautiful blonde woman with cold eyes and a superior expression. She looked at Isabella with barely concealed jealousy, clearly not liking that another attractive woman was getting her husband's attention. "James, darling, introduce me," Catherine demanded. "This is Miss Elizabeth Rivers," James said, his voice strained. "A railroad investor from Boston." "How interesting," Catherine said in a tone that suggested she found it anything but interesting. "What brings you to our little frontier town?" "Opportunity," Isabella replied smoothly. "I believe the Western railroads are the future of American commerce. I'm looking to invest in the right projects." They spent an hour discussing business. Isabella asked intelligent questions that impressed even Victor. But her attention was always on James. She saw how he seemed hollowed out, like a man going through the motions of life without really living. She saw how Catherine spoke to him with casual cruelty, ordering him around like a servant. She saw his hands shake when he poured coffee. Good, she thought coldly. Let him suffer. After the meeting, James found a reason to speak with her alone. "Isabella," he whispered urgently. "Please, we need to talk." "I don't know who Isabella is," she replied in a cold voice. "My name is Elizabeth Rivers. Please, let me explain what happened. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Isabella interrupted. "You promised to marry me. Instead, you married someone else and let your brother destroy my father. You let him kill my father. What else is there to understand?" James's face crumpled with anguish. "I had no choice. Victor threatened to kill you. He said if I didn't marry Catherine, he would make sure you had an accident. I thought I was protecting you." For a moment, just a moment, Isabella felt her resolve waver. She saw genuine pain in his eyes. But then she remembered her father burning to death while James watched. She remembered 3 years of loneliness and grief. "You had a choice," she said quietly. "You chose yourself over me. You chose wealth over love. And now you have to live with that choice." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone. ## the plan in motion. Isabella began her revenge carefully and methodically. First, she started buying up land parcels that the Winchester Railroad needed for expansion. She paid fair prices to the landowners, who were happy to sell to someone other than the Winchesters for once. Without those land rights, the Winchesters' new railroad line couldn't be completed. Their investors back east began asking uncomfortable questions about delays. Next, Isabella befriended Catherine Winchester. It wasn't hard. Catherine was lonely despite her wealth, married to a man who clearly didn't love her. She invited Isabella to tea and complained endlessly about her disappointing marriage. "James is useless," Catherine said bitterly one afternoon. "He mopes around like a sad puppy. He still talks in his sleep about some Mexican girl he was infatuated with years ago. Can you imagine? Pining for some poor nobody when he has me." Isabella sipped her tea calmly, filing away this information. "How terrible for you." "It is," Catherine agreed. "If it weren't for my family's money keeping this railroad company afloat, they would have failed years ago. The Winchesters are all show and no substance." This was exactly what Isabella needed to know. Catherine's family money was propping up the Winchester business, and Catherine was unhappy enough that she might be manipulated. Meanwhile, Isabella hired investigators to dig deep into the Winchester Company records. What they found was even worse than she'd suspected. Victor Winchester wasn't just running a dishonest business, he was actively stealing from his own family. He'd been secretly selling company assets and pocketing the money, hiding the losses with creative accounting. Isabella gathered all the evidence carefully. She made copies of documents. She interviewed people Victor had cheated. She built a case that would destroy him. ## the first domino falls. Isabella arranged a meeting with the Territorial Business Commission, bringing her evidence of Victor's embezzlement. She presented it as a concerned investor worried about fraud in the railroad industry, not as a personal vendetta. The investigation was quick and brutal. Within 2 weeks, Victor Winchester was arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The amount of money he'd stolen was staggering, nearly $500,000. The scandal rocked Copper Valley. The Winchester family's reputation shattered overnight. Investors demanded their money back. Creditors called in loans. The mighty Winchester Railroad Company teetered on the edge of collapse. Isabella watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction. But she wasn't done yet. With Victor in jail and the family business failing, Catherine Blackwood Winchester made her move. She filed for divorce from James, citing his failure to provide the lifestyle she'd been promised. And she demanded repayment of all the money her family had invested in the Winchester Railroad. Without Catherine's family money, the company collapsed completely. The Winchester estate went up for auction to pay debts. James, who had always been kept out of the financial side of the business, suddenly found himself penniless. Isabella attended the auction and bought the Winchester estate for a fraction of its value. She stood in the grand mansion where James had married Catherine and felt a surge of triumph. She owned everything they had once possessed. ## the hollow victory. But as Isabella walked through the empty rooms of the Winchester mansion, something unexpected happened. She didn't feel the joy she'd expected. She felt empty. Her revenge was complete. Victor was in prison. The Winchester family was ruined. James had lost everything just as she had. She had won. So why did victory taste like ashes in her mouth? Isabella rode out to the old mission ruins where she and James had once met. It was the first time she'd been back there since everything fell apart. She sat among the ancient stones and let herself remember the girl she'd been. Innocent, hopeful, in love. That girl was dead. Isabella had killed her herself, burned her away in the same fire that took her father. And now what was left? A wealthy woman with no one to love, sitting alone among ruins, surrounded by the wreckage of her revenge. I thought I'd find you here. Isabella spun around. James stood at the edge of the ruins, looking thinner and older than she remembered. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple work clothes. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. What do you want? Isabella asked coldly. To tell you the truth, James said quietly. All of it. You deserve that much. I don't want to hear your excuses. Not excuses. Truth. James sat down on a stone a few feet away from her, not trying to get closer. When I told my family I was going to marry you, Victor didn't just threaten me. He sent men to follow you. To watch you. He told me in detail exactly how he'd make sure you had an accident if I didn't do what he wanted. James's voice broke. He described how easy it would be to start a fire at the clinic while you and your father slept. How accidents happen all the time in medical practices with so many flammable chemicals. He said it so calmly, like he was discussing the weather. Isabella felt ice form in her chest. So you married Catherine to protect me? I thought I was, James whispered. I thought if I did what they wanted, they'd leave you alone. I was a coward. I should have fought harder. I should have taken you away from here, run away with you, something. But I was weak and afraid, and I convinced myself I was being noble by sacrificing our love to keep you safe. He looked at her with devastated eyes. And then Victor burned down the clinic anyway. He did it to punish me for ever defying him in the first place. Everything I sacrificed, all the pain I caused you, and he killed your father anyway. I've lived with that guilt every single day for 3 years. Isabella stood up, trembling with emotion. You should have told me. You should have trusted me. We could have figured something out together. I know, James said. I know that now. But I was young and stupid and I thought I could handle it alone. I was wrong about everything. He looked around at the ruins. I lost everything that mattered, my integrity, your love, my self-respect. Money and status don't mean anything when you've betrayed the only person you ever truly loved. Isabella felt tears running down her face for the first time in years. I destroyed your family for revenge. I ruined you. I know, James said simply. And I deserved it. Victor definitely deserved it. The only thing I regret is that I hurt you so badly that you had to become someone else just to survive. He stood up slowly. I'm leaving Copper Valley tomorrow. I just wanted you to know the truth before I go. And to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Isabella. He turned to walk away. Isabella watched him go. Her heart a battlefield of warring emotions. He was leaving. She'd never see him again. She had her revenge, but at what cost? James, wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. Where will you go? She asked. Anywhere. Nowhere. It doesn't matter. His voice was hollow. Without you, everywhere is equally empty. Part 3. The redemption of souls. The price of hatred. Isabella spent a sleepless night in the Winchester mansion she now owned. The house that should have represented her triumph felt like a prison. She walked through empty rooms filled with expensive furniture, and felt completely alone. She thought about her father's last words. Live and be strong. Make them pay. She'd done exactly what he asked. She'd made the Winchester family pay dearly for what they'd done. But her father had also said, live. And for 3 years she hadn't been living. She'd been surviving, existing only for revenge. Had this been what her father truly wanted? Would he have wanted her to spend years consumed by hatred? Or would he have wanted her to heal, to find happiness again, to use her gifts to help people the way they used to together? Isabella sat in the grand dining room where James and Catherine had once entertained society guests. In her hand was the black and silver ring James had given her, the one she'd kept as a symbol of betrayal. She'd carried it for 3 years like a piece of shrapnel buried in her heart. What am I doing? She whispered to the empty room. She thought about James's face when he told her the truth. She'd spent 3 years imagining he was cruel and heartless. But what if he'd been telling the truth? What if he really had been trying to protect her and made a terrible mistake? Victor had definitely been a monster. He'd threatened murder, committed fraud, and eventually killed her father. He deserved everything he got. Bang! James had been weak and foolish but not evil. He'd made the wrong choice, and that